episode. We have returned from Las Vegas. Welcome to another episode. My name is Rob Schuh, as always, your host. I am joined tonight, very excited to bring on Jordan Elliott. Jordan, welcome to the program. Welcome back from Las Vegas and the NFL draft. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm fantastic. It is 70 degrees. There's a breeze. There's clouds again. Fantastic time in Vegas, but I could not be more thrilled to be back home in Northern California where the weather is not, 85 degrees at midnight.
Yeah, I hear you. And I'm back in Portland and it is, overcast, raining and whatnot. And I'm still glad to be back from Las Vegas. I'm glad not to be out there in that heat. It was nice. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed myself in Las Vegas. And much like you, I'm just not born to live in the desert. That is not my style. I need a little more temperate climate. And so, yes, I am glad to be back. But man, pretty exciting freaking weekend. We'll jump right into this. Very excited. For those of you that do not know Jordan, his information is down below. You need to follow the man on Twitter. He is building out a YouTube channel. You need to subscribe to that as well. The information is down below. But Jordan is a very informed individual when it comes to all of these draft picks. So I want to get your take, Jordan. But the first topic that has to be brought to the table is the signing that occurred today. Jason Verrett is back with the 49ers. Jordan, I'm interested to hear your take on the return of Jason Verrett.
Well, the terms haven't been disclosed as far as I know. I hadn't seen it yet, but it's a one-year deal. You got to believe it's very incentive-laden and probably not for a ton of money at this point based on the unfortunate injury history that Verrett has had. But at this point, what do you really have to lose? We've seen what he's capable of doing when he can stay healthy. During that 2020 season, he was arguably one of the best 5 cornerbacks in football. He was a guy that could travel with a number one option from another team. He was a guy that really just had that skill set that, had him drafted as a first round talent, that had him as an all-pro talent. Really, the only thing that's derailed Jason Verrett is the unfortunate injury. So I think it makes sense for both sides. He has a chance to prove it and hopefully show that he can stay healthy again, bounce back, hit the market next year. And then from the 49ers point of view, now you're looking, if he's healthy and ready to go, at a starting corner group of Charvarius Ward, who I think is going to be very good with this defense, especially with this upgraded pass rush compared to what he had in Kansas City. You have Emmanuel Mosley, who's been a very, very solid number 2 for them. And then you add in Jason Verrett, and it gives you tremendous flexibility. And all of a sudden, we're going from looking at the cornerback position as, maybe it's a question mark. Maybe we have some uncertainty and don't feel great about it, to, they're probably a top 12 unit in the league if all 3 of those guys are healthy. I don't think that's unreasonable to expect at all.
No, I mean, if you can put all of those guys in starting positions, it goes from an area of concern to, as you're saying, one of the stronger groups within the NFL. I'm selfishly happy because I invested in a pair of FIVA cleats, game-worn cleats that had been delivered at the end of last season. And I was worried that they weren't going to bring them back to the Niners and I was not going to get to sport these. But now these are going to make appearances all the time. I am going to try and tempt Jason onto the program using said cleats. You never know. You never know. He may feel, a little more likely to come on with a fan, someone who's supporting his venture here. But it is, it's a long hill to climb. You saw a tweet come out today from Raheem Mostert talking about, hey, the stars are aligned. You get signed by the San Francisco 49ers on the very first day that I'm back to running again. So this is the return to a player who has had a long injury history. But you mentioned it. If healthy, it really changes the 49ers outlook at corner. Do you see that as the most likely scenario, if he's healthy, that you're going to have Verrett starting on the outside and Mosley slides inside to the slot?
I would say, if we're talking strictly on the, roster depth chart, probably, but I think that those guys have the flexibility to go inside. So, hey, if Verrett's really at the top of his game and, they are playing the Rams and, DeMeco Ryans wants Verrett on Cooper Kupp, I think you could easily interchange he and Mosley based on the matchup. And I think that flexibility is just as valuable as the talent that they both have. And realistically, the 49ers quarterback group looked pretty good yesterday. So as of now, this isn't a situation where it's like the season. I felt like last year they were much more dependent on Jason Verrett being healthy for that group. Whereas this year it's more of just you're playing with house money at that point. We just got back from Vegas. I'll throw out that slogan. You're playing with house money with Jason Verrett at this point. And if you can play great. If not, I don't think it sinks the season. And also, really quick before I finish, HR, thank you so much. She said, cool Baron Davis shirt. Baron Davis, one of my favorite basketball players of all time, so I always appreciate the recognition there. But yeah, that'd be my answer for that, Rob.
I love it, and love the Warriors reference. Got to get down with those in the chat that notice enough of the garb to call out what you got on there. I like that. HR coming in very observant. I love it. HR coming in to say he subscribed to your YouTube based on the Baron Davis shirt, so you're winning them over one by one. Jordan, that is phenomenal. Yeah, I see this as a win for the 49ers. Obviously, we don't know the contractual details of it yet, but I would assume that it's a pretty close to a minimum deal. Would that be your expectation? Not having seen anything yet, would you expect this to be a pretty minimal prove-it deal for Jason Verrett, a chance to earn a bigger contract next offseason?
Yeah, I'd have to imagine it's as low as possible in terms of the guarantees. And I would have to imagine that there is some sort of structured incentives built in there where he has the opportunity to make more, based on playing time, not missing games. And if he was a Pro Bowl level talent 2 years ago, if he's making Pro Bowls, getting those accolades and those media awards, I have to believe that it's not just a locked in, 1 year, $2 million deal or something like that. I would expect the guarantees to be low, but the incentives to take it a bit higher. So that's, in my opinion, that's the best possible outcome for the 49ers because, hey, if you get that level of production from Jason Verrett, you could be more than happy to shell that money out. And if the unfortunate string of injuries continue and he's unable to stay on the field, your investment from a cap standpoint is minimal, and you've already insulated the cornerback room enough that losing him for a game or two or a stretch of games isn't going to hurt as much as it did last season, in my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense. And you have to assume that simply signing the deal is a strong indication of where Jason Verrett is in his recovery, that he wouldn't sign a deal if it seemed unlikely he was going to be ready to play next year. You would think that this coincides with some level of optimism by Jason Verrett on being able to make that recovery. Tom Jensen, by the way, pointing out he was at that game of the shirt you're wearing, and Oracle erupted for said dunk.
Hey, man, that's still to this day. I've had so much fun, watching the Warriors with Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, KD, all these, this past decade. There was nothing like that 2007 playoffs. And that dunk over Karolinko, I wasn't there. I just saw it on TV. But I watch replays of that still, and it gives me chills. It was just, there was something different. And it's so funny because, they made it to the second round and lost. But to me, that playoff run is still just as special as when they went all the way and won the championships. And I think it's so fun to look back on. It's 15 years ago now that it's wild to think about how much time has gone by. But yeah, I can only imagine how special it must have been in that moment because there was something different about that building at that time.
There is, and I can relate to that prospect of a game that didn't necessarily get you to the end goal, but it still sticks out as one of the most special that you've ever been to. I'm a Trailblazers fan. I still have a warm spot in my heart for the Warriors as well. But being there for Damian Lillard's shot over Paul George, I know that they didn't go anywhere. They met up against the buzzsaw that was the Golden State Warriors. But man, that shot, that game forever will live on in my memory. No doubt about it. That Niner guy, Sneakerhead here on the channel coming in to say at Rob Schuh, adding Verrett means if he is healthy, he's on the roster. DJ, Lenoir, Castro Fields, and Womack are on the bubble. Why did they draft two corners and not a safety? It is beyond me. It is an interesting thing. We will get into the individual picks for sure. Also want to call out what No Way Jose brings to the table. Damn, Rob, Pat's got two of your guys, Cole Strange and Marcus Jones. Yes, they did. They make me feel better about my talent evaluation, but as a draft Nick, clearly I was attempting to draft them far too late in the draft. I feel better that they were wanted, but I wouldn't have gotten them had I been targeting where I said I was.
It's an unfortunate part of doing all these mock drafts, right? I did a ton, so it's really funny. I talked about it with you in Vegas. This year, I actually felt pretty good because I did, for anybody who's familiar with my work, I write for Niners Nation. So I did a bunch of mock drafts that I never published where I just had free time on my phone. I did 5 full mock drafts with all 9 picks for Niners Nation. And I actually had 6 of those players that I mocked to the 49ers either get drafted or sign as undrafted free agents. So there were guys like Jason Poe. I took him in my mock draft at 187. He's an undrafted guy. Donovan West, I took him as high as 105. He's an undrafted guy. So I feel really good that that it felt like a good fit for the 49ers, and I was able to diagnose that. But I'm like, man, was my value way off here? Because I would have, if the Niners took Donovan West at 105, I would have applauded that pick. I would have thought it was fantastic.
Right.
So I totally get what you're saying. Like, it feels good to know that we're like kind of validated, but it's like, man, it really reinforces that none of us in media or outside of these actual, front offices and these rooms where they're breaking down the draft boards know where each teams are valuing these guys. And not everybody's going to have a consensus on some of these players.
No.
Cole Strange, for example. I loved Cole Strange. I thought he would have been a great pick. Hey, if the Niners even took him at 61, I would have thought that would have been fine. 29, never in my wildest dreams did I think Cole Strange would be taken at 29. So it's a kind of humbling reminder that as much as, we know that certain players will be tied to certain teams and which players are really good and this and that, the draft will always be something that has an element of unknown to it. And that's kind of cool that it's still something that has that allure of surprise to it. And even us spending hours and hours doing mock drafts don't have it all figured out.
That's right. I mean, you saw people on ESPN and NFL Network absolutely balk at the Cole Strange pick where it was. So we're not alone in not having valued him as highly as the Patriots did. Chris Royal coming in here with the super chat, and we're getting into the picks in just a moment. I have you pick 93 and 105, which 93 would be our selection of the running back out of LSU, and 105 being the selection of Danny Gray, the wide receiver out of SMU. He views those as depth/insurance pick. Depth if Debo sticks around, or insurance if he doesn't, because their combined skill sets mimic Debo. That's an interesting one. We're going to get into those players specifically, but I certainly agree that if you were to lose Debo Samuel, which I'm glad that the 49ers did not, you would need to both reproduce his receptions as well as his ability on the ground. So I agree with that stance that you absolutely need two players. Also, special shout out to Chris, who I met and hung out with at the draft. That was a lot of fun, Chris. Good to see you there. What are your thoughts in general on that? We're going to get into each pick one by one in just a moment, Jordan. But do you see this if they had lost Debo, or if something came up where Debo was traded in the future, would this be depth in replacing that production?
I think that it's definitely an interesting point. I think it's really hard if we're like talking. I think the word production is key, right? Because nobody's going to be able to recreate Debo's individual skill set. So I do think it's interesting that maybe a combination of players brings to the table what Debo does on his own. With the Davis-Price pick, I'm very intrigued because he's 6 foot, 211. A lot of his highlights, if you go back and watch and, just are doing a general overall view, are going to show him running over guys. But when you really start diving into the game film and watching him rep after rep after rep, what really stands out is his explosiveness. And, Vish Kumaran, for those of you guys who are familiar with him, Vish is fantastic. Pointed out, I was talking to Vish about this the other day, and he pointed out, as nice as the 4.48 speed is at that size, he had a 1.53 10-yard split, which is going to really show off the initial burst, the initial get off, the start speed from a complete stop. At 153, that's what he's running at 210 pounds, running guys over. Tyreek Hill ran 150. So he was really, really close to a guy who's one of the most explosive athletes in football, while also being this bowling ball made of cement running over defenders in the SEC. Again, I'm not a guy that likes to take shots at smaller conferences or subdivisions, but when you're playing in the SEC, there are generally bigger, stronger, faster athletes. And right. Davis-Price was running through guys' faces while also having that explosion. So, the more and more, I was caught off guard, first off, by the pick. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, I knew this was coming all along. I did a bunch of mocks with kind of similar skill sets with running backs. Never once took Davis-Price. But the more and more over the weekend that I dove into some game film and dove into some of his skill set and background, hey, I think that it could be something where he's the primary, not only the primary running back, but somebody where, again, Kyle Shanahan's going to get really creative getting this guy the ball in space. And when you add that explosion, that top end speed, and the fact that he's running north to south through people, he may not be Debo Samuel, but he doesn't have to be. He can be Tyrion Davis-Price and be just as valuable of an asset down the line in terms of production. Then that's where I think the key word there is production.
And some of the similarities that you list there, as far as being a bit more of a robust individual, but the ability to get from 0 to 60 very quickly, that does remind you of Debo Samuel, right? He may not have the super high end top speed, but Debo Samuel gets up to his top speed very, very fast. And that inertia, getting that amount of muscle moving moving at that rate of speed, I think is what makes him so special around the line of scrimmage. So seeing some similarities there is a bit refreshing. Again, nobody is going to replace Debo in that regard, but that production is key. James Wilson, a little late to the show, but I got to do it again. James Wilson talking about Rob, bust out the J Fiva shoes. You know, I was showing that earlier, and I'm going to be showing them again and again and again because Fiva is back. Fiva is back. All right, let's transition here, Jordan. Enough of what the people want. Let's get to what we want. Overall impressions of the draft. Now, we saw this from two different sides. I went out to Vegas with press pass in hand, intending to be back behind the scenes. However, I was there with a good longtime friend. It was supposed to be sort of a group trip. It came down to where it was me and my buddy. So we spent most of the time hanging out as fans, watching the draft in that style, because I wasn't about to ditch my buddy, right? I was there with him, wanted to spend that quality time with an old friend. But you got the backstage look at it, right? What we had at the combine is what you were doing at the draft. Just give me a high-level overview of what it was like to witness the draft from that perspective in Las Vegas.
It was really cool. I got to spend some time with a lot of people who, do fantastic work in this field. I got really great access. The day before the draft, actually on Wednesday, they did a really cool event for some of the local football teams, youth football teams in Las Vegas. So the players went out and they were throwing footballs and doing drills with these kids, which it's something that they'll cherish for the rest of their lives.
Most
and as
definitely.
part of that, we got media availability with them after, where they're, hanging out in shorts and a t-shirt and, bucket hats. It's not as formal and stressful as the night they're actually being drafted. So they were a little bit looser. We got some great one-on-ones with some of these guys. I admittedly was going there trying to get as much as I could just in case the 49ers did trade Debo and got a first-round pick, trying to go around and get a sense for guys like Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, some of these guys I thought might have gone there. So that was super cool. And then, getting the chance to do the press conference immediately right after, this is 20, 30 minutes after these guys have been drafted. They get time to talk to their families and agents. So you get that really raw emotion, of just these guys realizing their lifelong dream and getting to sit there and ask them questions about that. And one of my favorite questions that I was asking was, now that you've been drafted, what's up next for you on a personal level? What are you really chasing now? Because getting to the NFL is a monumental goal in this life. So it was really cool to hear the feedback from some of these guys about what's next for them and where their kind of hunger is now directed as they're entering the NFL. So all in all, it was a great experience. And real quick too, the NFL does a really good job catering these events for media. Between the combine and this, my family's Italian, right? They put out a big tray of cannolis. I'm like, oh, this will probably be okay. I'm not expecting much. They're catering for 500 people. Best cannoli I've ever had in my life, hands down. So just wanted to throw that out there. NFL media, I don't know if it was them. It was at Caesars Forum, so maybe it was Caesars behind
Props to Caesars.
Best cannoli I've ever had in my life. That's the winner. The winner of draft weekend was whatever sous chef made those cannolis that they brought out for us.
So 49ers draft, maybe a C. Cannolis, A+.
Absolutely.
I'm telling you. Hey, if it was anything like what we had at the combine there in Indianapolis took great care of us, then I think you are spot on. That probably was the highlight of the frickin' program. Got to bring in Jerry Binkley here, asking the key question. I had a contest on the channel here that asked if anybody got Mr. Irrelevant right. They submitted their answers. They were attempting to win themselves a Cheers mug or their choice of the DJ Jones barbecue sauce. And nobody guessed. Nobody guessed Brock Purdy. So no, nobody got Mr. Irrelevant. I'm going to think of some way to at least get rid of the barbecue sauce because we're getting close to the expiration date and somebody's got to use this thing. So we'll find a contest to send it out there. Jordan, if only you had sent in a submission, you'd have some barbecue sauce headed your way, my friend. I was going to say,
man, I mocked Brock Purdy at 262 it was so funny. I did this like 3 weeks ago, and I do quick little write-ups. I'm mocking 9 players. I tried to keep it to a couple paragraphs a piece. And I literally said, think Nick Mullins 2.0 with a bit more upside. And it's so funny because Brock Purdy gets picked at that slot. And that's the first thing I'm seeing is, here's Kyle Shanahan got another Nick Mullins.
Right, I see it everywhere.
So yeah, I thought that was super funny. And hey, I like the value of the pick there. He's not going to be a starter, but it's a solid backup option down the line. You can't pay, no disrespect to Nate Sudfeld, you can't give him $2 million a year to be the backup going forward.
No, you can't. You cannot. Also, speaking of no disrespect, Chris, please pass along my forgiveness, my apologies to your wife. Yes, met Chris and his wife. It was a phenomenal time spending time with them on the draft. That was my mistake. My mistake. Please pass that along, Chris. Please. I had a phenomenal time. Yes, Bullpup 33. Hey, forget the draft. Bring the cannoli. That's it. You have told them what the star of the frickin' show was.
I'll be honest, I'm not the kind of, if I'm in a setting where there's a buffet and there's a bunch of people, I try to take just a little bit, let everybody go up and eat some. Once everybody started clearing out, I was very tempted to go up and just start throwing them in my backpack. Like ask one of these guys for a Ziploc bag, start shoveling them in my backpack and take a bunch home. I didn't. I was able to restrain, but they were very good cannolis.
Hey, I would have appreciated that, Jordan. You may have had one remaining when we ran into each other. I would have liked it, but hey, I'll forgive you. I'll forgive you for that fact. All right, let's get into this thing because we got a lot of things to cover. But first, I just want to get your opinion on the idea that there were no trades. Clearly, there was no trade of Deebo Samuel or Jimmy Garoppolo, which I think people were either dreading or hoping for, depending on which player you're talking about, but also no trades by the 49ers within the draft. They stayed put at every single position and selected 9 players and then brought in a plethora of undrafted free agents. Were you surprised by the lack of trades over the draft?
No. I mean, I'm surprised maybe the Niners didn't trade up given the amount of picks that they had. I'm surprised that they just kind of stood pat and made all those picks. I didn't think there was any chance at all that Jimmy was getting moved. He still can't pass the physical, and it's really hard to agree in place for a deal when the player can't pass a physical for months. So I realistically never thought that, obviously you can never say never, but it really was like a 0.0001% chance that was ever going to happen. The Deebo one, yeah, I was surprised. I thought given the way things were going and given the fact that the 49ers potentially had the chance to get back a pick that's in the top 10 where the receiver I would have taken and the one I thought was the best in the class and Garrett Wilson ultimately went. I thought maybe it was at a point where it was so irreparable and that, it's the difference between knowing you have the 10th pick this year, knowing the amount of players and who's going to go where for the most part compared to, hey, I have a 2023 first. I don't know how that class is going to shake out. I don't know how this team's going to finish, where that pick will fall. I thought Deebo might have been moved, but I have to say I am very, very impressed with the fact that the 49ers did not panic because that offer that was like 10 and a 5th round pick while also having the 49ers send back their 2nd round selection was absolutely terrible. I was harping for weeks that there was no chance the 49ers were going to get 10 and 35 or 10 and 38 without sending something back. If it had been 10 and 35 with the 49ers sending back 61, I would have entertained it. I don't think that would have been terrible value. Getting only 10 and a 5th round pick while also sending back your 2nd round selection would have been awful. And it looks even worse now considering, and I know we're going to do it in a sec, 49ers got a just darn good player at 61. They got a really, really good player that could end up being a huge piece of this team moving forward. So I just want to say really quickly, obviously you don't ever want to think about moving a player like Deebo, but I'm very impressed that the team held firm in their value for him and didn't get enticed by that top 10 selection and get to a point where they panic sold a very, very good player.
I'm in alignment with you on what you were surprised by and what you weren't. Not surprised that Jimmy Garoppolo did not get traded. Wasn't expecting that to happen. It would have been great if it had happened, but wasn't expecting that to happen. The Deebo Samuel trade, slightly surprised by. I was in that 51-49, believing there was more of a chance that he was traded than not traded, but not completely sold on it happening. And I'm also glad that the 49ers held firm given that value they were going to get in return. Although I did mock out a draft where they only got 10 and turn that into what 10 is in draft value, and it actually becomes quite the draft. I agree with you, though. I'm pleased with who the 49ers ended up selecting. And I also am surprised that they didn't jump up and took 9 players and the number of undrafted free agents that they brought in. It's just mind-boggling to think that they will attempt to have this many players fighting to make the 53-man roster. There are going to be some intense camp battles and maybe a couple of perimeter trades that happen. Bringing in Syard's comment before we go one by one in the draft and talk about these picks. Syard coming in to talk about one in particular. Am I the only one unbelievably hyped for Danny Gray? Dude, freaking Halls. No, you are not the only one. I had him in my ideal mock draft. I actually had the 49ers selecting him a few picks earlier. I picked up pick 101 by trading back out of pick 10 because I had the Debo trade in there, and I took Danny Gray there, and I absolutely loved it. I love the Niners getting him at 105. So that takes us there. Let's get into this one by one. Syard, we're going to talk about your man in just a moment, but we're going to start out with Drake frickin' Jackson. Let's get into the draft picks one by one here. All right, so let's look at 49ers come on the board at pick 61 after waiting with excruciating pain through day one to see if one of my favorite, if not favorite 49ers was going to be traded in Deebo Samuel. He was not. The Niners stay put at 61 and take Drake Jackson, the edge rusher out of USC. I had the 49ers selecting him in the second round in my ideal mock as well. I had picked up another pick in the 50s. I think it was 51, and I took him there. I was pleased at 61. Jordan, did you believe this was the appropriate value? And what's the skill set you see coming out for Drake Jackson?
Yes, and I cannot tell you how happy this makes me because as we got to draft day and as he started, I didn't think he was going to be there past 45. I thought he was too good of a player.
Nice.
Last year around September, I was talking to Marco Martinez and Roscoe's Chris, Mr. Roscoe's, for those of you who know him on Twitter. Roscoe's is a big USC guy, and I was like, man, I would love Drake Jackson with the 49ers. I would love for them to trade up into the first round because they obviously didn't have the first round pick. I didn't think there was any chance he was going to fall out of the first round. The production wasn't great this year. The player still is the same. The trait still is the same. So as he was sliding about 40 minutes before the pick happened, I'm in the media room and I start tweeting out GIFs of Drake Jackson. You know, I'm talking to people on Twitter. I'm like, Drake Jackson at 61. The pick's going to be Drake Jackson. Niners go on the clock, and I'm like, one last time, take Drake Jackson and don't look back. I'm pounding the table. I don't know if you guys could hear it as I was doing it now. My apologies if it made too much noise. But I was literally in there like, you don't overthink this. This is such an easy pick. Right. I cannot tell you how I rarely like throwing out A pluses, A's, whatever for draft grades because we really don't know. But based on what we can see and based on what you could get at that point, there is not a better player they could have came away with at 61 in my eyes than Drake Jackson. And here's why. Drake Jackson is a guy who comes in at, I believe he's 6'6", and he put on 30 more pounds than he'd finished the season at, but has tremendous bend around the edge, tremendous natural just get off at the line of scrimmage, and is somebody who has all of the physical traits to develop into this secondary weapon alongside Nick Bosa on this 49ers defensive line. So I think that realistically, the 49ers stood by what their philosophy is by addressing the position group that they've deemed the most valuable outside of the quarterback position. You know, if we're talking strictly non-quarterbacks, they've made it very clear, hey, we're going to pump resources into the defensive line. If we're picking at 14, if we're picking at 3, if we're picking at 2 or 61, if the D lineman's there that we like, we're going to take him. And I just think that this, as of now, is a great pick. And before I pass it back to you, I will say this too. With Drake Jackson, you're not in a position where you have to throw him out there day one and get immediate production. You have the luxury to develop his skill set, have him work with Chris Kosaric and Darryl Tapp and that defensive staff, have him work with these guys on the defensive line. But the upside there is way too good to pass up. 4 or 5 years from now, we could be looking back on this as how in the world did the NFL let Drake Jackson slide to 61 because of the combination of skill set, traits, and then landing spot with the 49ers. A+ for this pick. And that's probably the only one out of all of them I would say that for, but objectively, unbiasedly, A+, dude. It's fantastic.
I love that. And it gets me fired up just hearing it. Now, do you see this as a situation much like in selecting Aldon Smith, where we're likely to see Drake Jackson just on obvious passing downs throughout his rookie season? Or do you think that this is someone who can contribute on all 3 downs?
I think eventually he can. I think right now it would be good to get him in that kind of rotational role. In the 49ers defensive line, it's another situation where, like we were talking earlier, hey, if you don't get much from Jason Verrett this year, you're already insulated at that position. The Niners are even more insulated on the defensive line. And there's going to be a couple players that if they can't get a, day 3 pick back for, that'll get cut, that are going to make another NFL team. They're just too stacked at the position. There's too many players and not enough positions for them. So I think Drake Jackson, again, is a guy where they look at the traits, they look at the ceiling, And one thing that the 49ers coaching staff doesn't get enough credit for is their ability to develop a lot of these guys, because it's really easy to go back and give all the praise to the front office and saying, hey, well, you picked this player in the 3rd round, this player in the 5th round. But realistically, a lot of that success is directly a result of the coaching and the coaching staff's work with that player to get them up to not only NFL game speed, but then continue to move them from a solid NFL starter to an impact high-level player. And then you end up with guys like George Kittle, who's a 5th-round pick, who's an all-pro level talent, one of the best tight ends in football. So I think the same thing could be said for the defensive line. You see all of these guys who other teams didn't want, Willis, Amenahue, Arden Key, who then come and work with this unit. The players deserve the credit for putting in the work, but the common denominator is Chris Kosaric, Darryl Tapp, and that defensive staff. And so I think that the 49ers made a big bet on their own development of a player with freakish athletic traits, which I think is going to pan out in the long run.
I absolutely love the pick, and I agree wholeheartedly in giving credit to Chris Kosaric and the ability of the 49ers to continually invest there and then develop those players, find those gems in the rough that other teams have been unable to develop, that have the athleticism, bring them into this system and allow them to flourish. The next pick, I will admittedly, say I had no idea. I had no idea the Niners were going to go this direction this early. I thought if they addressed running back that it would be something that they did in the 4th round or later, and I certainly did not have my eye on this gentleman. But the 49ers at 93 go ahead and select the running back out of LSU, Tyrion Davis-Price. I hadn't done the due diligence on this individual, but I know that you had and continue to do said due diligence. What's your impression? Were you surprised by this pick? And now looking back, how do you feel about it?
Yes, I was surprised by it. I was as surprised as I was last year when they took Trey Sermon. But I thought that they were going to take a running back. I just did not think that it was going to be as early as 93. But admittedly, I don't fault them for it, because if you look at last season, Elijah Mitchell was their only running back that it felt like Kyle Shanahan really trusted, who was also healthy for them and available. Deebo Samuel was carrying the ball 8 times a game, at least. I think he had 8 or more carries in each of the last 10 games, including those playoff games as well. And the 49ers just needed to insulate that room with talented players and depth that was going to actually have Kyle Shanahan in a position where he's like, I'm going to call plays for you to carry the football, because it felt like we got to a point where literally the only running back that was the case for was Elijah Mitchell, which is why Elijah Mitchell was carrying the ball more on a per game basis than any back we've seen Shanahan, since Shanahan's been in San Francisco. That hasn't happened. So I admittedly am not the strongest proponent of I think if you're going to take a running back, you take him early in the 2nd round. You get a guy like Javonte Williams, Dalvin Cook, who am I blanking on? Derrick Henry, sorry. Like guys like that you can take in the top of the 2nd round, great. If not, wait till later. But I understand what they're doing. And I think ultimately it's too early to say that, Trey Sermon's was a mistake last year. I admittedly did not feel great about that pick, more so because they traded up to get him. When you're giving up multiple assets to get to a spot, it was at 88, I think 89 last year, if I remember correctly. I remember it was in the late 80s. So it was a few picks before, roughly the same area of the draft.
Right.
If you're trading up, it's more egregious because you're investing 2 picks into that player at that point, right?
Correct.
And I did not feel great when they did it last year. I didn't have that same feeling this year. For whatever reason, the more and more I looked into the player, I'm like, you know what? Like, this makes more sense to me. I think this is somebody where I'm feeling a little bit better. And again, it's too early for me to sit here and say that Trey Sermon isn't going to, be an impact player for this team going forward. But I certainly think that this feels like a situation where they're like, hey, you know what? We might have missed last year, and we can't be afraid of the optics of people being like, oh, you just took a running back in the 3rd round last year. Hey, if you make, and that's kind of my thing where it's like, if you make that mistake, you can't be afraid to write it right away. I would much rather a team know immediately, like, hey, we might have got this wrong. Let's work to fix it now, rather than being afraid to double down and miss again on an early running back. Because that's the thing that shocked me the most. I try to, keep in touch with the pulse of the fans. I read feedback on articles I write and stuff like that. And people were very unwilling to give this Davis-Price selection any kind of patience to pan out, because they're like, well, the Niners have missed on both of the early round running backs they took. And realistically, like, Joe Williams, I think, was a 4th round pick, if I remember correctly. And Sermon's a 3rd. It's not like they're taking running backs in the top 10 and missing. And just because you missed on those 2 doesn't mean you should be afraid to continue to try to do it. So ultimately the selection, I think just because of the position is what got people. But if you isolate the position, you just look at the player. Again, we talked about it earlier for those who weren't here. The elite burst, the 10-yard split. His 10-yard split's 1.53 seconds. Tyreek Hill's running a 10-yard split at 1.50 seconds. The difference is Davis-Price is a guy that's, again, 6'1", 211 pounds and running through people while having that elite burst. So, you know what? To me, again, I haven't seen him run at the NFL level. I'll probably be a little bit more strong in my convictions after going to training camp and seeing how he's doing day to day. I think he has the potential to be the bell cow back in this offense and be a guy who's running for 1,000 yards, for a couple seasons on this team.
It'll be fascinating. That will be a group that you really want to pay attention to in preseason to see how this is going to shake out, especially for those of you that play fantasy football. To Jordan's point, you may actually see a new lead back for San Francisco, which would not come as any surprise underneath Kyle Shanahan. It's a new lead back every single year in the Shanahan system. I don't view this as a condemnation on Trey Sermon. It could be that it becomes a very robust running back room, but it does open up the possibility, as some people point out, that you could see a potential trade within that room. You could see someone who the 49ers invested a reasonable amount in to bring them in, eventually getting released. But I would be thrilled to have the running back room as it currently stands. Plug in this gentleman, remove JaMychal Hasty, and I think that's a stacked running back room to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, even if you have Mitchell, Davis-Price, and Jeff Wilson carrying the football, that's a three-headed monster when you combine the scheme, the run blocking that's going to be in front of them. And hey, Anthony Lynn has a magic touch. Everywhere Anthony Lynn goes, his running backs produce, and he gets guys that, may have been a little good before. They get better, and guys you've never heard of that are running for 1,000 yards or producing a top 5 rushing offense under him. So you already have Kyle Shanahan and the equity that he brings, and then you're adding in Anthony Lynn, who just seems to have this, innate ability to get the most out of running backs wherever he goes. So I think even just those three by themselves invites a lot of optimism for the running backs.
I agree. I see the criticisms and hear them, both Tom Jensen and, again, coming in later, we had Robert Whitaker, not necessarily against the pick, but talking about those players that we gave up at that position. But again, if the 49ers felt the value was there for Tyrion, I am all for it. They do need that robust running game. They went the other direction with the next pick, and I didn't hear any complaints about it. Again, I had the Niners taking this guy at 101 in one of my mocks where I had picked up additional picks for trading, unfortunately, Deebo Samuel. But Danny Gray at 105, the wide receiver out of Southern Methodist. I am thrilled by this one, and it seems 49er faithful are as well. Speed kills, and Danny's got plenty of it. What were your thoughts of this pick, Jordan?
I liked it. I had a mock where I took him in that exact slot, and ironically enough, it was one where I had traded Deebo as well. I think that he's a guy who really complements a receiving room. Obviously, if Deebo Samuel stays, it makes it even better because then you're looking at him as a third option in that receiving group and a fourth on the team with Kittle being there too. And when you look at the skill set, he's a guy who, yes, he can stretch a defense vertically. He can really open things up underneath because of that 4.33 speed and the ability to take a top off a defense. But Kyle Shanahan said it himself. The other thing that he really brings to the table is he's a guy that has a good feel in the open field with the ball in his hand. A guy that you can get the ball to on a quick 1-3-step slant, on an over route over the middle. Somebody that you can get the ball in space on some of these tunnel screens, bubble screens, and stuff like that. On these end arounds, we've seen them run for Deebo. And you get to a point where when you're looking at Deebo and Danny Gray and Brandon Ayuk, they all can do a lot of those things. And it gets to a point where a defense can't just watch film and be like, okay, well, if we're seeing this end around coming or this tunnel screen coming, it's only going to be Brandon Ayuk or it's only going to be Deebo Samuel. You have to worry about all three of those guys doing that. And I think that's something that's a very understated, or, it doesn't get talked about enough, is the amount of flexibility and versatility that the 49ers have. When you think of it, like guys like Ayuk and Deebo, and you have guys like Juszczyk that can line up in the slot, block in the backfield on the next play. They're handing the ball off to Kittle as he's pulling on what looks like run action to the other side. Like there's a tremendous amount of misdirection. And I think that Danny Gray is somebody who adds to that. He's not just a guy that's going to run fast in a straight line. He has a much more complete skill set that I think we will see, obviously, when he hits the field.
Going to be a nightmare for defenses, just as you described that, because you will be unable to predict who is getting the ball in various formations. You have so many versatile players, and you know that's exactly what Kyle Shanahan covets within his offense, the ability to surprise defenses and keep them guessing. The next selection by the 49ers was another name that we had heard being linked to San Francisco. It certainly is one that we kept our eye on in Indianapolis at the Combine. I know that you spoke to Spencer Burford. He was selected at 134 coming out of UTSA. To me, I had the 49ers going a different direction with interior O-line. However, as soon as they went running back with their second pick at 93, that screwed up everything that I had been mocking. I had the 49ers going interior O-line at 93, leaving them available to bounce back in the fourth round to then address running back, which may have created less of a fervor amongst 49er faithful had they gone that route. Clearly, they saw the value in Tyrion. What do you make of the lineman they selected here, Spencer Burford?
I loved it. I thought that Burford was one of my favorite offensive line prospects in this draft. I luckily had receipts saying that in one of my articles in Different Niners Nation. Again, this was one where I felt great about it. Where I'm like, okay, I clearly didn't miss too badly with some of these evaluations I did, especially coming off last season when I did not have anywhere near the same level of predictive success. With Burford, you get a guy whose traits are phenomenal. He dominated at UTSA, which again, it's a smaller school, so teams might not give it the same credence as if he was, playing at Alabama or Michigan or something like that. But he is a guy who has the traits to get out in space, and I think he's somebody who isn't going to start right away. I don't think he's going to, I think McGlinchey will be back. Trent Williams is obviously there, but if Mike McGlinchey's quad isn't healing up properly, if he prices himself out and is getting really expensive and signs elsewhere, Burford is a guy by next season who I think could feasibly step in and be that player. And, it was really fun. We got the chance to talk to him at Indy at the Combine, a really nice guy. And, I asked him, hey, what are your thoughts about potentially playing, in a Kyle Shanahan offense, playing with Trent Williams? And he's just like, man, to even be mentioned in the same sentence as him is why it would be a dream come true. Well, hey, guess what? The dream happened, man. You're here. You're in San Francisco now. It's time to go to work and start learning from that guy, which is what he mentioned during his interview, just to have the ability to learn and work side by side with him. So when you look at the player, you look at the film, the traits, again, the 49ers did a really good job in this draft. This is a word you're going to hear me throw around a ton, is traits. They did a really good job getting guys who have that high athletic ceiling that may need a little bit of seasoning, a little bit of coaching up, but they don't really have too many positions where they're really, dependent on these guys coming in from day one. So you afford yourself the luxury of buying time to coach these guys up. So I'll be honest with you, the Drake Jackson pick is probably my favorite, but Spencer Burford's like 1B. Like that I was in the hotel room with Jason getting ready to head down to the media room on the last day, and I was like, I got to see this pick before we head down, and it's Burford, and I'm like, oh my god, man, like they actually did it. And again, it was another situation where I had been mocking Burford with the sixth round pick, and they ended up picking him, right there in the fourth. So the value, again, it's another situation where the San Francisco 49ers clearly had much more value for Burford than any of these mock draft simulators or these other things that we use, the tools we use leading up. Great pick. I really, really like this pick. This one and the Jackson one, you'll hear me sitting here and saying, out of the draft selections, I like some of the drafted signing picks as well, but for the draft selections, those two in a league of their own for me. I thought those were the two by far best picks in this draft by the 49ers.
Do you see, as Paul indicates here, you've kind of indicated that he could have the flexibility to play outside. Do you see him more as an interior guard or transitioning to the NFL more as a tackle?
I personally think he's going to be a tackle. He could play guard. I don't think that's crazy to say he could be. I personally think he has the ability to play tackle, and I think he'd be a really, really good right tackle given his athletic ability and the traits that he has.
I love it. I love the flexibility. I think the 49ers have added to the depth of the trenches throughout this, and absolutely a solid strategy in doing so. We had someone comment, hey, is Rob still reading those comments in the chat? And my buddy Dustin correctly pointing out he's mentally still at the craps tables in Vegas. I'm still thinking, yo, 11. I'm still thinking about those craps tables. Hey, you saw me out there. I was having a little bit of luck. Out there, Jordan. It was hot at the craps table.
This is a humble man. It wasn't a little bit of luck. This man was on fire at the craps tables. Hey, you got a large amount of positive things that come with Rob Schuh, but humility might top all of them. Don't let this man's humbleness fool you. He was out there shaking and baking on those craps tables, man.
Shaking and baking. All right, Castro 007 coming in with the super chat. Good luck, Niners. Glad to see you guys kept Debo, as am I, Castro. And hey, you guys were gracious hosts there in Las Vegas. The Raider fans were out in force. It was very impressive. I think that Vegas could easily become the host of the draft moving forward. It seemed much like Indianapolis fitting the combine. The energy of the draft felt like a very natural fit within Las Vegas. Did you feel that same way, Jordan?
Yes, absolutely.
Muted,
if I was running the NFL, I would absolutely do that if I had any say in that. And I get what they're trying to do, moving it city to city. You
right.
create more fans by moving it to the city, and they get to experience it. Respectfully, there's very few places in America that you're going to get people from all 32 fan bases to want to shell out money and show up and hang out for 4 or 5 days at. And I would say Las Vegas probably tops all of them. And you saw it there. We saw fans from all different backgrounds. We saw all 32 teams represented. And, excuse me, you have the ability to transition from the draft, those concerts they did after. Then people go and they hang out at the casinos, do shows, whatever it is they do. And everything, just like you mentioned, Indianapolis, everything's so close. You can have people walking. It just all around makes a ton of sense. Vegas is a place that obviously has the capacity to host those large crowds and host that kind of event and the venues that can support that. So if it's me going forward, I would make it just an annual thing in Las Vegas where it's this big draft party. It's this big extravagant event. And I'm admittedly not the biggest, like Las Vegas guy. Like I had a great time while I was there. This isn't me just saying, hey, I want to go to Vegas and party. It was very, as a media guy who was working, it was very convenient to be able to walk around and go, and hey, realistically, there's certain parts of the country, like it was in Cleveland last year. There's some days in Cleveland where it's below freezing at this time of year still, even though we're getting towards, the middle of spring, summer and all that. I think it just makes too much sense to keep it in Vegas. I would absolutely do the same.
It does. I got to side with Dustin here, though. For those of us standing out there in the mob, please give me a chair and some shade. That is what we needed. No question. Good stuff with the important question. Did you win any money, Rob? I mean, if you hear what Jordan is telling you about that craps table, you know this man made a little bit of money. Real deal sports talk. Rob was straight up fire at those craps tables. Yes, there was a little bit of money was made, but hey, you never leave Vegas with what you want to. That's why that city is so glorious and so big and has so much money coming out of its pockets, because they like to keep it there. All right, let's transition to the next player. This gets into, from here on out in the draft is really where I lean heavily upon my draft nicks, upon my draft guides, and that's why I'm so excited to ask you about it. But Samuel Womack at 172, the cornerback out of Toledo. I like what I'm seeing on this guy, but what was your initial reaction when this pick hit the board?
Surprise, to be honest. I didn't spend much time, if any, if I go back watching Samuel Womack before the draft. There were a lot of corner prospects I watched, a lot of guys I dove into. Samuel Womack wasn't one of them. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it was, I spent hours watching this guy before. The 3-cone looked pretty good, if I recall correctly. He looked like a guy who had the size kind of prototype that they look for at that position. But I'll be honest, out of all the picks, this was probably the one that I knew. I knew more about the FCS tackle from Fordham than I did Samuel Womack. So I'll be honest with you on this one. This was one that I didn't see coming and didn't spend too much time really looking into before.
The size did seem like the biggest fit, right, for the prototypical what the 49ers are looking for. The tape was something I had to go and watch. I'm much like you in being completely transparent that this guy was not on my radar, but did immediately see that he seemed to fit the size profile that the Niners are looking for at the position.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you can never have too many good cornerbacks. So if you see one that you like that fits your prototype, that fits your profile, draft 10 of them. It doesn't matter. I've never heard an NFL team come out and complain and say, hey, we have too many good cornerbacks on our team. Yeah. It will never be an issue that you hear teams complaining about. So I don't mind it at this point. Like the values.
It's not, and it's something that you could always trade away, right? If there's camp competition that is fierce where the Niners realize they're stacked at the position, someone's going to want one of those cornerbacks that they can't afford to get onto the 53-man roster.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, I totally agree.
All right, so you said you knew a little bit about him out of Fordham. The 49ers select Nick. I have no idea how to pronounce your last name. The offensive lineman out of Fordham at 187. Give me the pronunciation first. Is it Zakelj?
I believe it's Nick Zakelj, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check. I thought it was yeah, it should be Zakelj, if I'm not mistaken.
I've added in too many letters to his name.
Yeah, I believe it's just Nick Zakelj. Yeah, it's just Nick Zakelj. Yeah.
All right, let me fix that.
Yeah, no worries.
Boom. ELJ is the end of it, just like that. That makes it easier to pronounce. Okay, now give me, so forget that other guy who we had on there. Give me your info on Nick Zakelj out of Fordham.
So he's a guy who, again, is an FCS background guy. So teams might have this, his competition wasn't great. It wasn't a situation where he was being tested week in and week out. But he has a pretty strong resume if we go back and look. So he was at Fordham for parts of 5 seasons. And when I say parts of 5 seasons, I mean that their seasons weren't full seasons due to the COVID pandemic and some other stuff. So he played across 4 seasons. In that span, he had allowed 22 pressures and 5 sacks. So if you're looking at it, again, it's not full seasons for each of them, but that's still a pretty low number. That's pretty strong. What really stands out is they played Fordham, the school he is at, the FCS school, played in Nebraska, who's a Power 5 opponent, to open the 2021 season. And Zakelj had 32 pass blocking snaps in that game, didn't allow a single pressure, didn't allow a single sack, QB hit, anything, posted a complete clean sheet and looked really good doing it. So in the test he got against a Power 5 school, he not only did good, he absolutely aced it. He got 100% on it. He came away from that game with a clean sheet against the toughest competition that he faced. So again, I think it's a situation where the 49ers look at a guy who potentially does kick inside, who maybe can play tackle. Just like I was saying, you can never have too many good cornerbacks. You can never have too many good offensive linemen either. And I think the 49ers are wise at this point to invest in guys who have that kind of skill set. And Zakelj is another guy too, where the big thing that stands out about him is that he's also a guy who's very athletic. Like, don't be misled by the fact that he played at Fordham. I don't know how much people are into the relative athletic scores and who are into the, that specific kind of metric, but he did a fantastic one. His RAS was 9.74 out of 10, which is ranked 23rd out of 1,289 offensive guards where they're projecting him since 1987. So if you're going to rank 23rd out of over nearly 1,300 players in a given athletic relative score, again, it's not a foolproof system, but it speaks to how athletic he is. So I think that he's somebody that definitely you can't get fooled again by the FCS stuff. Great athlete, somebody that maybe Chris Forster and that offensive line group can coach up. But at this point, I love the strategy. Kind of the theme with the last few 49ers picks is that they just banked on athletic traits. Well, not pure athletic traits, but they took guys who have really, really good athletic scores, really good combine numbers, really good just raw athleticism.
Right.
But at that point, you might as well swing for the fences. The odds of having a 5th-round pick being an impact player for you, don't get fooled by the George Kittle picks, the Elijah Mitchell picks. Those are the anomalies, not the those are the exceptions, not the rule. So I think, again, this is a situation where they took a guy who has really, really, really good athleticism that they can hopefully develop.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the higher the athleticism, you would think, the higher the correlation of potential ceiling for the player, right? They may not have had that athleticism properly tapped into as of yet. If the 49ers coaching staff can get into that, you're looking at potentially a high ceiling player, because I agree with you. Those one-offs where you have a home run hit in the 5th, 6th, or 7th round are highly uncommon. And the 49ers have a very deep roster, and therefore these players are unlikely to make the 53-man roster to begin with. So taking players with high upside seem like a prudent move. The 49ers invested in offensive line with that pick. They go defensive line with the next. I saw this as a potential sort of, move back to the Balky era of almost trying to take someone that could be, red shirt freshman type of situation where to start the year, you have at least 12 players along that defensive line that could make the 53-man roster for the San Francisco 49ers. You could be looking at a situation where Elliott Davis, who got selected at 220, the defensive lineman out of UCF, could begin the year on the physically unable to perform list or one of the roster exceptions and become reinforcements later in the year. Is that how you saw this pick as well?
Yeah, I definitely think that he would have been taken sooner if it wasn't for the injury and some of that stuff that, is at play, obviously, when making these decisions.
Right.
I looked at it as more so like DJ Jones is gone, and while the 49ers defensive line is deep, if you go and you watch Davis's tape and you watch what he was asked to do at UCF, he's a guy who really was just a very solid 0-1 tech, lining up over, guard centers. I didn't see too much of him in the 3 tech. I admittedly haven't gotten through most of, I've watched very little tape of him, but what I have seen was him really dominating from that 0-1 tech, really ripping through that A gap, making a difference in the backfield, particularly against the run. And while DJ Jones is not going to be an easy guy to replace, I do think that this is a player where maybe you're looking at it as, hey, maybe we can get somebody that can give us kind of the same impact as we got from DJ Jones, who was also a 6th. I know he was a day 3 pick. I think DJ Jones was a 6th-round pick, if I remember correctly.
I believe so.
That's what Clea Davis kind of looked like to me, was somebody that they could kind of have in that same role, who's big, but also has that really great lateral movement and the ability to rip past guys and get in the backfield and make a difference. And hey, pass rushing is what sells, right? Like that's what excites people, but you still have to stop the run if you want a chance to rush the passer. And Davis is a guy to me where, hey, he might have some, just like DJ Jones. DJ Jones didn't put up these gaudy sack numbers, but he definitely stressed defenses from the offensive lines from the interior. And I think Clea Davis is a player where he flashed some of that potential at the collegiate level. And I'm not going to sit here and say a DJ Jones replacement, because I feel like that's disrespectful to DJ Jones.
Right.
$1 million a year for a reason. He's a really, really good football player. But I think he's somebody where they looked at where they're like, hey, we hit a home run with DJ Jones 5 years ago. Maybe we can do the same with a player like Clea Davis.
It made a ton of sense to me. Again, you're just hoping that you're scratching the surface of what DJ Jones gave you, but you're giving up a fraction of the assets required that you would have had to give up in order to bring DJ Jones back. So the hope is there. The talent seems to be there. It may not show up right at the start of the season because he is coming off of injury, but could be a way in which to keep an extra healthy body, a reserve on the roster, so to speak, and bring that in mid-season when you're most likely to be dealing with some injuries along the defensive line to your starting units. The 49ers then come back at 221 immediately following that pick and pick up another defensive back, Tariq Castro-Fields out of Penn State. Was this a candidate that you had done much research on? I mean, obviously, we're into the tail end of the draft here. It's hard to truly be up to speed on everyone that's going to get selected. But was this someone that you had on your radar?
Admittedly, no. And a lot of the guys that I'd spent a lot of time watching guys and getting to know guys that were projected to go in that round. But like Jack Jones, for example, is a guy I really dove deep into. Arizona State, and the Patriots took him at like 130 or something like that. And I had taken him with one of those 2 picks at 220 or 221 a handful of times. Chamari Connor was another guy from Virginia Tech I watched a bunch. So it makes it really hard when you get to this point because you don't know where teams are valuing guys. But Castro-Fields, when you get into the tape, he's somebody who does, again, the athletic traits what stands out, right?
Right.
Run the 4.38 40-yard dash. His athleticism score, which they give out at the combine, was tied for the second highest among all corners since 2013. And ironically enough, number 1 on that list is actually Jason Verrett. So the 49ers clearly banked on the athletic ability of this player. And he's somebody who, if you go back and watch, I didn't attend the Senior Bowl this year. I was crunched for it. I unfortunately had some stuff I had to do back home, so I couldn't go. But some people did some great work at the Senior Bowl, and there was some good footage I was able to pull up from his reps there. And he was somebody who showed the ability to fight through the football with his hands, to press guys at the line. And again, hey, at this point, you bank on the traits. You bank on the fact that this guy has all this athleticism, has the ability to close in with that 4.3 speed. So, am I expecting him to come and start at corner at year 1? No. Him making the roster is going to be hard. He's going to have to fight for it. Just like you mentioned, there's a lot of talented players, but this all ties in. And I'm sorry if I'm getting redundant and saying the same things over and over. They're banking on athleticism. And to me, that's so much better than like overthinking it and trying to get like a guy who maybe potentially could be a starter. Like swing for the fences when you're picking at 221. Like at this point in the draft, your odds of hitting on a player that's just going to be a consistent starter aren't great, but you might come across this diamond in the rough, athletically gifted, freak of nature kind of player and be able to coach them up into a viable player for your organization. So I think that strategy they seem to employ in this draft, that was the common theme, kind of starting with, I guess you could throw Danny Gray in, but I don't think Danny Gray is just athleticism. But when you start with the Burford pick and you go through the last, the Womack, and you go through those last few picks there, That's the common denominator to me. Zakelj is the same way. You're starting to get to these guys that are just athletic freaks, and you're increasing your odds of having your own impact turn these players into viable starters, because they're bringing the athleticism, they're bringing the physical ability. Now it's on you to get the most out of these players and help them carve a path to being an impact player within your own specific system.
And it would seem in particular with this pick, with that speed and the athleticism, that could make him a prime candidate to be a special teams ace, right? He has a clear path to making this team and contributing right away while he continues to develop and potentially turn into that impact player at another position in addition to special teams. Well, you called this one. So I'm interested to hear what you think of the fit, and interested to hear if you think he makes the 53-man roster, or whether this is just going to end up being a practice squad quarterback that's needed if in case something happens to one of the two on the 53-man roster, with Nate Sudfeld getting that guaranteed money. But Brock Purdy is selected at 262, the quarterback out of Iowa State. You had him mocked to the 49ers. Had you submitted that as your guess, you'd have a mug on its way to you, Jordan. But what was your impression of Brock, and why did you mock him to the 49ers?
He just seemed like a Kyle Shanahan guy. He's a smart player. He's cerebral. He knows where to go with the football. He's just somebody that, like Nick Mullins, which is why I said, Nick Mullins 2.0, doesn't really have great physicals. His arm isn't great. He's more mobile than Nick Mullins for sure. He has a little bit better ability to get out of the pocket, stretch out on those bootlegs and whatnot. But he just really felt like a Kyle Shanahan kind of guy, where, again, the cerebral ability is there. Kyle's always going to value the ability to know where to go with the football. And that's one thing that doesn't get talked about enough with their selection of Trey Lance last year, is that we get so caught up in, hey, he has his rocket arm, he's big, he's strong, he can run, but his mental capacity is what it feels like what really sold Kyle Shanahan. So I think it's no different for a guy you're mapping to potentially be the backup for a few seasons as well. Because again, while I think Nate Sudfeld offers them that immediate option this year, it's bad business to give a guy like Nate Sudfeld $2 million a year going for, hey, if he can get it, good for him. I'm not going to sit here and hate on the guy. Line that bank account, line your pockets, Mr. Sudfeld. I fully support that. But if you're coming from a front office point of view, it's better to find a cheaper option. And Brock Purdy on a rookie deal as that 7th round pick, to me, just offers more value. And then you get into the, exclusive rights free agency and stuff down the line, where it's much more financially viable to have the guy who's really just, a break glass in case of emergency type of player,
right?
Like that. You're not making this pick with the, with this idea that Brock Purdy is going to be, pushing Trey Lance for a starting job anytime soon. But again, it can never hurt. And realistically, we have to think back to, remember, there was a time when there were teams that were calling the 49ers, and we don't know the exact compensation, but there were teams that were willing to part with draft capital for Nick Mullins during that 2019 season after he had started those string of games. And, I was at the game, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I know a lot of people here in the Bay Area that kind of lived through that Niners Raiders, territorial rivalry. I never admittedly was super into it. But the last battle of the Bay, Nick Mullins is immortalized among 49ers fans for that performance. So it may be a little unfair to Brock Purdy to, put that pressure on him to deliver a performance like that on a random game 3 years from now. But again, all jokes aside, it's back to, you get a guy who knows where to go with the football, started a lot of games at the collegiate level. And at this point, I like the pick. I like the value, because you get to a point where I think he's going to answer your question. I think he's going to be a practice squad guy to start.
Right.
It feels like the 49ers are going to carry 2 on the active roster and then have a practice squad guy ready to call up. But, going forward, again, if he looks good, he does well with the scout team stuff. He does well with the, reps he gets during training camp. Next offseason, maybe he's the guy that gets bumped up, and he's the guy that's the backup for the next couple seasons going forward.
That makes a ton of sense, because as you're talking about, it becomes a cap game, right? Fitting all of those salaries underneath. And if you're counting on Nate Sudfeld to just be a quality backup that doesn't necessarily win you a lot of games, you don't want to be guaranteeing that type of money. Much better to have a rookie quarterback on that rookie controlled cost, fixed salary that is significantly lower. That could be a real advantage for the 49ers next offseason. I agree. He's most likely headed to the practice squad this year. Hopefully nobody poaches him from the 49ers. The 49ers experience, one of the sneakerheads here on the channel, coming in with the random question that we can answer off the cuff. Rob, do you think we are still a Super Bowl contender? I do. I personally believe that this team will go as far as Trey Lance can take them, and I'm a big believer in Trey Lance. I think this is a talented roster, extremely deep. I do believe that we'll see a couple of key pieces added later on in free agency. But even as the roster stands right now, I believe this team can compete for a Super Bowl. Do you feel I'm being a bit of a homer there, Jordan, or do you agree that this is a talented roster?
No, I don't, because at the end of the day, Jimmy Garoppolo definitely deserves credit for his role in the success they've had. But I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo's a player that is irreplaceable. And I think the 49ers have been able to obviously make the NFC Championship game this past season with him at the helm. They went to a Super Bowl 2 years ago. So if Trey Lance could just give them, a league average level of play and something where it's pretty consistent. And again, he's going to have growing pains. He's a younger quarterback. There's going to be bumps here and there. There's going to be plays like that interception he threw in the Texans game. But he's never been a guy that's been super irresponsible with the football. He's always been a guy who had low turnover numbers, who seemed to make the right decision. So I think that based on the scheme, the roster, having Kyle Shanahan and DeMeco Ryans coaching both sides of the ball, yeah, if you get an average, if Trey Lance is the 18th best quarterback in the NFL this year, the 49ers can make a run through the playoffs. That's how good the roster is. So I don't think it's unrealistic at all. I wouldn't go into the season saying Super Bowl or bust. Anything else is a failure. I think that's unrealistic given the circumstances, but I don't think that there's anything that would tell me that the 49ers shouldn't be in that discussion, especially when we look around like, hey, Tampa Bay has Tom Brady. They're still going to be a tough team to beat.
Right.
Packers have Aaron Rodgers. The Cowboys, even though the Niners beat them in the playoffs, they were a good team last year. But if you look around the NFC, there is not one team that the 49ers should, I don't want to say fear, because I don't think they fear anybody, but I don't think there's anybody that you put on a neutral field that's that much better than the 49ers. And you have to throw the Rams in too. They're the reigning Super Bowl champions, but I think 49ers fans are kind of like, hey, we've seen this movie before. We could beat the Rams, and the only time they've beaten us in the last 3 years is when they won on a last-minute field goal in the NFC Championship game. So, again, that all comes back to this roster is so good that the only thing they really need, it's just like you said, as far as Trey Lance will take them, I don't think Trey Lance necessarily needs to be, a guy that's driving the car necessarily. He just needs to make sure that it doesn't go off the side of the road. If that's an okay analogy, I don't know if that makes sense. Like
it makes total sense. Yeah, total sense that they're a good enough team, a good enough roster that team is going to get them to a certain level, and it will only be the contributions of Trey Lance that would get them beyond that, or any significant failings that could derail a season where they perform reasonably well, like getting into the playoffs reasonably well. All right, I want to pick your brain on one last topic before I let you go here, Jordan, and that is the undrafted free agent haul that came in for the San Francisco 49ers. Specifically, there are two players that I had to the 49ers in various mocks as I was going through, not in my ideal mocks, but in ones where I was playing around with different position groups at different points of the draft. Both Donovan West, the center out of ASU, and Leon O'Neal Jr., the safety, I had the 49ers potentially taking during the draft. They ended up getting both as undrafted free agents. What was your impression of this undrafted free agent class, and what really stood out to you, Jordan?
The 49ers crushed their undrafted free agent signings. Not only those two guys, they also brought in Jason Poe, who I would have taken with the pick at 187. I think he's a tremendously fun athlete. He's somebody who profiles as an interior guy, guard, center, literally lined up at fullback. There's videos of him going around catching balls, running over the middle. Just, again, a kind of athlete where you're getting such a high level of athleticism. So I just think that the 49ers did a really, really good job. Like that first hour after the draft ended, I'm in the workroom, I'm writing my articles, I'm finishing, and I'm sitting there getting these notifications on my phone where I'm like, man, John Lynch is just cooking right now. This guy's putting out, Michelin star, 5-star, like all-time meal right now with whatever he's whipping up back there. And I think that that's something that really doesn't get talked about enough, because the 49ers have had success with undrafted guys before. And I think that doesn't get enough, credit. Even guys, you get guys like Mostert who weren't, their own signing day of. He's an undrafted guy, but you look at guys like Jeff Wilson, you look at guys like Emmanuel Mosley, and
Kendrick Bourne.
Yeah. You get to a point where they have had success there. And while it's, really fun now, because I can make cases for Donovan West, Poe, Leon O'Neal, how all three of them can make the team. The odds of all three of them making the team probably aren't great, but the fact that we can even sit here and actually entertain that and not be tilted, you can make a logical, objective argument. It's pretty cool, man. Like, it's really hard to sit here once you get past 262 players to then start pulling out a handful of names and be like, wow, these guys could make not only an NFL roster, but one of the, probably top 7 to 8 rosters in the entire NFL. Like, that's pretty cool. And I think that that's something that, again, a lot goes into that. And it gets to a point where you have to look at the guarantees, right? They gave Donovan West $100,000 in guarantees.
Right.
Comparatively to other NFL contracts, may not seem like a lot of money, but when you're talking undrafted free agent money, that's a pretty significant investment. So I think that also tells you that they really, really like the player. And, Donovan was a guy that we got to speak to at the Combine, former college teammate of Brandon Ayuk. They're reunited now, at least for this offseason. So I absolutely loved it. I thought that they did as good a job as any other team that I saw with their undrafted free agents.
I thought so too, as did Jason Walsh, who heard you say that they were cooking. They did the best, and Jason agreed. Yes, they did. Filthy Swift 49, loved the Poe pick as well, bringing them in. Dr. Robert Anthony Jr., sneakerhead here on the channel, reminding us that Azeez was also another undrafted free agent that the 49ers were able to develop. Robert Harden just coming in to say love Schuh because he is a fan, but honest. That's what I try for, Robert. That is what I try for. I thought it was a fantastic draft overall that I think ended on an exclamation point because of the undrafted free agents. If it weren't for hitting that home run at the end, I don't know that I would have been left with such a positive taste in my mouth. But I look back through the draft, while I'm a little bit disappointed that they decided to draft 9 players because I don't think that many are going to make the 53-man roster. I probably would have traded away one of those picks toward the end of the draft. I look at the players they took, and I'm not sure who I would give up just to have an additional pick in 2023. So I can't criticize too harshly. Was there anyone, before I let you go, Jordan, was there anyone that we missed on where you said to yourself, the Niners had a chance and they didn't pull the trigger?
No, not really, to be honest. I wasn't too. Last year, I was there was like 3 or 4 times where I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? Like, it was right there for the taking. There was nobody that I sat there and I was just really like, wow, if they didn't take Drake Jackson, that would have been immediately number 1 for me. I don't think so. Real quick, I wanted to say too, I can't believe I omitted Azeez Al-Shaair because I've been, trying to drive the Azeez Al-Shaair hype train for a long time now, and I'm happy that he's finally getting the recognition he deserves. And then the other thing I was going to say, I noticed there was a string of do you Robs have like this like secret meeting place somewhere where like Robs get together and do Rob things with one another? Because I noticed there was a string. There was you, there was the Dr. Robert, and then another Robert. And I'm like, man, I'm wondering if there's this kind of secret society of Robs somewhere where you guys just like hang out and, just vibe out.
Yeah, there's a handshake. Someday I'll show you the handshake, but then we'll have to off you at that point because it's a very exclusive club. But yes, the Robs get together. We do. Well, this has been a fantastic show. I mean, I love talking draft. I'm still vibing off of Las Vegas. I had a phenomenal time. We ran into each other. I know you had a great time as well. But thank you so much for joining me today, Jordan. This has been a blast talking through the 49ers draft results and the fact that Jason Verrett is back on the team and Rob's cleats get to make another round of appearances throughout the year. I will be bringing them in. But Jordan, thank you so much for being on the program today, my friend.
Hey, thank you so much. Appreciate having me on. It was fun hanging out in Vegas and, appreciate everybody in the chat. And, Rob's my guy. So anybody who supports Rob is a friend of mine. So appreciate you guys for appreciating Rob.
Man, that is good stuff. All right, so Jordan's information is down below in the description. Go give him a follow on Twitter. The dude's got like 5 times as many freaking followers on Twitter as I do. So go over there and get on there and go subscribe to his channel because he is making a run at YouTube as well. I am sure I'll be over there at some point and I will drag a bunch of you with me when I do. Jordan, as I said, always a pleasure. I look forward to the next time we are able to connect. This has been a wonderful show. Thank you to everyone who is here in the chat participating. We couldn't do it without all of you. Real Deal Sports Talk, in Robs we trust. Exactly. All right. Until next time, I'll be back on tomorrow with my mailbag episode. Look for that tweet to go out from the left shoe in the morning to get your 49ers related questions. I'll be back on at 5 p.m. tomorrow. Until then, cheers, 49ers.